Okay, so if you've ever gotten into attachment theory, you know this feeling. It's super frustrating. You've read all the books, you see your patterns playing out in real time, you get why you do what you do, and yet you keep doing it. So why doesn't just understanding the problem actually fix the problem? Well, in this explainer, we're going to break down how real, lasting change actually happens.
This right here, this is probably the single most important idea we're going to talk about today. It's where so much self-help advice just completely misses the mark. You know, having that aha moment, that flash of insight about your attachment style, that is not the same thing as actually intervening to change it. They're two totally different things, not even in the same ballpark.
And this really is the central question, isn't it? I mean, you can perfectly map out your entire relationship history. You can explain your anxiety or your avoidance with incredible precision, and still, the next time your partner doesn't text back for an hour, that same old panic or that same old need to shut down just floods your system. Look, this isn't a personal failure. It's not about willpower. It's all about understanding the very architecture of your brain.
Now, don't get me wrong, this doesn't mean insight is useless. Oh, far from it. What insight gives you is actually incredibly powerful. It gives you a meta model. Think of it like having a model of your own model. It's the ability to step outside of that knee-jerk reaction and just observe it and think, oh, okay, there's my abandonment prediction firing again, instead of just getting swept away and believing it's the absolute truth.
So what this meta model does is it creates this crucial little gap. It's a pause, a beat. It's this space between the feeling firing off and you actually acting on it. And in that pause, you suddenly have a choice. You can feel that wave of anxiety and then choose not to send that third frantic text. But, and this is the key, the feeling itself, that raw prediction, it still fires with the exact same intensity. So, insight gives you a better relationship with your model. It doesn't actually change the model itself.
So if we want to change the model, we first have to understand what it is we're dealing with. And at its core, your brain is, for all intents and purposes, a prediction engine. It's constantly trying to guess what's going to happen next. And the part of that engine that generates those gut-level emotional reactions, it operates on a completely different system than the part of your brain that reads books and understands theories.
And this right here really lays it out. You've got these two totally different systems. The knowing mind, that's your conscious self, right? The part that reads articles and forms intentions. But the predicting system, that lives in the body. It's autonomic, it's automatic, it's that jolt you feel in your chest. In this system, it just doesn't update with new information or knowledge. It only, and I mean only, updates through lived, felt experience. You literally cannot think your way into a new prediction.
Okay, so if it only updates through experience, then what kind of experience does it actually need? Well, according to what's known as active inference theory, it's not just any old experience. There are three very specific, non-negotiable conditions that absolutely must be met for your brain's prediction engine to finally start to recalibrate. That's right, three. Exactly three. And here's the kicker. They all have to happen at the same time. You know, most of our attempts to change fall flat because we might hit one of these, maybe even two if we're lucky, but it is so rare to hit all three simultaneously.
Okay, let's really break this down. First up, you need new evidence that directly contradicts your old belief. So if you're terrified of abandonment, you need a real, felt experience of someone staying. Simple as that. Second, that violation, it has to be tolerable. This is so crucial. If the new evidence is too big, too jarring, your brain just writes it off as a fluke, an anomaly. It has to be different enough to register, but close enough to actually be believed. And finally, number three, your nervous system has to be in a calm, receptive state. This is often called a ventral vagal state, to even let that new data in. If you're in fight or flight, your brain isn't learning, it's just trying to survive.
All right, so theory is great and all, but what does this actually look like in the real world? Let's get practical and walk through some examples for different attachment styles.
Let's start with someone who has a more anxious attachment pattern. For them, the core prediction that's always running in the background is often rooted in a deep fear of abandonment. So, picture this. Their partner goes quiet for a few hours. The old model starts screaming, "They're pulling away! It's over!" But using that little gap that insight gives them, they choose a new action. They just wait. They sit with that awful, uncomfortable feeling. And then, their partner gets back to them, explaining they were just stuck in a meeting. Now, this is a small, tolerable piece of new evidence. It's not a magic bullet, but it's one little data point that says, hey, silence doesn't always equal abandonment. You repeat this 100 times, 1,000 times, and slowly the model actually begins to shift.
Okay,
Now let's flip the coin and look at the other side. For the person with a more avoidant pattern, the core prediction is often the opposite, that closeness is a threat, that it leads to being suffocated or overwhelmed.
So maybe their partner makes a simple bid for connection. Just asks how their day really was. The old model wants to shut it down, give a one-word answer, deflect. But the new action? Maybe they share one small genuine detail. And the new evidence? The partner just accepts it calmly and doesn't push for more. This provides that tolerable disconfirmation of the belief that any little opening will lead to being completely engulfed. It teaches the system, bit by bit, that connection can actually be safe.
All right, this next one is incredibly common, but we don't talk about it as much. This is for the person who is mostly secure, but they have one or two very specific, powerful triggers that just send them spiraling.
You know what I'm talking about. Maybe it's a certain tone of voice that just sounds exactly like dismissal, or a partner casually mentioning an ex. The old prediction just goes into overdrive. The new action here is to just observe that internal explosion, to get curious about it and not immediately escalate. The new evidence comes when they realize, oh, that tone wasn't dismissal, it was just tiredness, or that comment was totally harmless. This is all about super targeted updates. It's about feeding the system hundreds of tiny, tolerable pieces of evidence to recalibrate one very specific faulty wire.
So the whole point here, the big takeaway, is that the path to a more secure attachment style isn't about faking it till you make it. It's not about just acting differently. It's about fundamentally rewiring the model that generates your reactions in the first place.
And this slide just lays it out so perfectly. You see, all the common flawed advice tells you to change your actions. Just act secure. But that's absolutely exhausting because your underlying model is still screaming the old prediction. The effective approach, the one that actually works, targets the model itself. It's about creating a safe environment, intentionally seeking out those small, tolerable violations of the old belief, and giving your system the time and the calm it needs to actually integrate the new data.
I absolutely love this analogy because it is so deeply true. This process, it isn't some dramatic Hollywood breakthrough moment. It's slow, it's repetitive, and honestly, it's pretty unglamorous. It really does feel like practicing scales on a piano. You do the same small, boring exercise over and over, and you don't really notice a difference day to day. But then, over months and years, you look up and realize you've built this real, tangible capacity. The old prediction just gets quieter. That gap between feeling and action gets longer. That is what earned security feels like.
So I'm going to leave you with this question to think about. Looking at your own patterns, what is the smallest, the safest, the most tolerable experiment you could run? What is that first little piece of contradictory evidence that your prediction engine really needs to see and feel and finally integrate? Because that, right there, that's where the real work begins.